Have you ever witnessed someone being humiliated simply because they were wearing a server's uniform in just a few seconds? Under the dazzling lights of the upper class, a young woman was turned into a laughingstock for the amusement of arrogant, wealthy people. That night, in the Astoria Palace Ballroom in Chicago, an invisible line was crossed. And that very cruelty marked the beginning of the greatest turning point in her life. Beneath the radiant crystal lights, the marble floor shimmered like a massive mirror. Polite laughter rose above clinking champagne glasses, while the scent of Dutch lilies mingled with expensive Chanel perfume, creating an atmosphere of suffocating luxury. For the guests in tuxedos and ball gowns, it was nothing more than another ordinary Tuesday evening, where they flaunted their generosity by throwing money at things they would never actually use. But for Naomi Carter, this was her 16th consecutive hour on shift. The silver tray in her hands weighed heavily. Her non-slip shoes had rubbed her heels raw. Still, every step Naomi took was as precise as a familiar dance, because over the years, she had learned to melt into this glittering crowd, appearing only when a glass needed filling and vanishing before anyone could remember her name. Only a handful of close co-workers still called her by her real name, Naomi. To the guests, she was nothing more than the colored girl server, a shadow, a nameless ornament. But the most painful part wasn't her invisibility. It was the letter Naomi had received that very morning, a thin sheet of paper printed with a cold line of text. "We regret to inform you that your scholarship application has not been selected." Naomi closed her eyes as if the words were still etched into her heart. She had once been a promising ballet dancer. At 17, Naomi was accepted into the Donovan Academy of Arts, the dream gateway straight to Broadway. She clearly remembers the day her father, Robert Carter, laid the acceptance letter on their small suburban kitchen table. His eyes lit with pride as he hugged his daughter tightly. "Naomi, I've always known you were born to be on stage. You're going to shine. I just know it." Back then, Naomi believed her whole future was opening, filled with light, but everything collapsed on one fateful afternoon. The phone rang while she was at rehearsal. Her mother's trembling voice came through Naomi. "Your father had an accident at the construction site. They're rushing him into the ER." Naomi ran to the hospital still wearing her ballet practice clothes. The first sight made her freeze. The strongest man she had ever known lay motionless, his body hooked to tubes and a ventilator. The doctors explained he had suffered severe injuries and would need long-term treatment with enormous medical costs, tuition, dreams, and everything suddenly turned into luxuries. Naomi chose to leave the academy, taking whatever jobs she could, waitressing, dishwashing, cleaning, just to help her family stay afloat. Her white leotard and point shoes were folded carefully, tucked away deep in the closet, gathering dust along with a dream buried alive. And now, today's rejection letter felt like the final blow, a reminder that the ballet world had closed its doors on her for good. Naomi still moved through the glittering hall, her champagne tray sparkling under the lights, but her heart was unbearably heavy, every beat echoing the bitter question, does anyone in this glamorous room even know what I've sacrificed? Or to them, am I nothing more than a shadow, a tool for their display of power? She had no idea that in just a few minutes, an arrogant man named Whitmore would publicly humiliate her in front of hundreds of eyes, and that very moment would ignite the flame Naomi thought had long been extinguished. If you want to know how Naomi Carter turned humiliation into strength, Make sure to subscribe now so you won't miss the next chapters. The opening music swelled from the live orchestra, the violin's tender notes intertwining with the piano. But for Naomi Carter, every sound only deepened her emptiness. She set the tray of drinks down at table 12 when suddenly she felt a sharp, icy gaze fixed on her. Not the usual indifference she was used to, but something far more cutting scrutiny laced with contempt. Naomi lifted her head. In front of her sat a group of 4 young people in the front row, faces that frequently graced society pages. The man in the center, his slick blonde hair combed back and his black tailored suit immaculate, was Bradley Whitmore, the only son of real estate tycoon Charles Whitmore. Everyone in Chicago knew the Whitmore family, a name tied to skyscrapers piercing the sky and billion-dollar deals. Next to Bradley sat his stunning fiancée, Isabella Collins, her face cold as stone, her sapphire blue gown hugging her elegant frame. His 2 closest friends, Derek Sullivan and Chase Turner, erupted with laughter at every word he spoke, as though each remark was worth a fortune. Bradley leaned toward Isabella, his voice just loud enough for Naomi to hear. Look at them, like wind-up dolls. No soul, no passion. Isabella gave a faint smile, icy as ever. Derek and Chase broke into laughter, while Naomi swallowed hard, her hand trembling slightly but keeping the tray steady. The reminder from her manager, Mrs. Genevieve Morton, echoed in her mind, "Keep your head high. Naomi, never react." Naomi gave a polite nod before turning away. But just as she moved, Bradley's voice rang out again, this time louder, slicing through the elegant air like a blade. "You there. Stop." Naomi froze. The entire table turned toward her. Curious eyes began to settle on her. "Yes, sir." "How may I help you?" Naomi's voice was steady, though her palms were damp with cold sweat. Bradley leaned back, drumming his fingers lightly against the pristine white tablecloth. His eyes swept over Naomi from head to toe, as if appraising a cheap trinket. "What's your name, Naomi?" "Naomi Carter, sir." He repeated it slowly, each syllable heavy with mockery. Naomi Carter. Quite a name for such a menial job. Derek and Chase roared with laughter. Isabella's lips curled, her gaze sharp and unrelenting on Naomi. Bradley braced one arm on the table, pointing toward a tiny drop of water near his champagne glass. "Do you see that one drop of water stains a tablecloth worth thousands of dollars? To the people here, that is disrespect." Naomi gripped the tray tighter, her throat constricting. She knew he was deliberately nitpicking. If she lost her composure, she could lose her job tonight. "My apologies, sir." "I'll wipe it immediately." She reached for a napkin, but Bradley raised his hand to stop her. His voice cut sharper, louder now, drawing the silence of nearby tables. "No. The problem isn't the water. The problem is attitude. People like you forget that guests here pay tens of thousands of dollars for a seat. Do you really think you belong in this room?" A ripple of mocking laughter broke out. Naomi lowered her head, forcing back tears. Her voice was soft but firm. "I'll be more careful, sir." Isabella arched an intrigued brow. Derek and Chase nearly slapped the table from laughter. Bradley leaned closer, his words hissing through clenched teeth, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Maybe this job is too much for you. Fast food counters or scrubbing toilets might suit you better." The room stirred with murmurs. Some covered their mouths to stifle laughter, and others frowned in disapproval. Naomi's face burned. humiliation rising in her throat. Yet she kept her back straight, her voice unnervingly calm. "Perhaps you're right, but I will still do my duty tonight." Bradley's brow lifted, a smug grin flashing across his face. He leaned back, lifting his champagne glass, as if he had crushed the last shred of dignity from the young waitress. Naomi turned away, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The echo of mocking laughter chased after her, each sound slicing deeper into her pride. She had no idea that these cruel words were already sparking a hidden fire inside her, a fire that would soon erupt, burning away Bradley Whitmore's arrogance before all of Chicago. Naomi was just about to walk away when Bradley Whitmore's voice cut through the air again, cold and challenging. "Wait, Naomi, I don't think just wiping up a spill is enough to prove your worth." The grand hall fell silent. The orchestra's music was swallowed by a wave of curiosity rippling across the banquet. All eyes turned toward Naomi, waiting for the next act of this cruel spectacle. Bradley rose to his feet, his movements confident, like a man used to giving orders. He pulled a thick stack of bills from his jacket pocket and held it high for everyone to see. $10,000. Right here. If you dare dance a tango with me. A ripple of shock swept through the room. Isabella Collins covered her mouth with a soft laugh, her eyes glittering with mockery. Derek Sullivan and Chase Turner smacked their hands together, thrilled as if they were about to witness some rare form of entertainment. Naomi froze. That amount was enough to cover her father's remaining hospital bills, with some left over to finally breathe after years of hardship. But the price was steep dancing in front of hundreds of people waiting for her to stumble, waiting for a blemish they could laugh at. Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for those nearby to still hear clearly. "If you make a mistake, just one slip, then tonight will be the last night you ever work in this room." His words cut like a blade. Naomi's heart pounded wildly, as if trying to burst free from her chest. A part of her screamed to walk away, to cling to the little piece she had left. But another part, the one buried and silenced for years, was now burning, reminding her she was born to stand in the light, to dance, to be seen. The entire hall waited for her answer. Naomi lifted her chin, staring straight into Bradley's icy gaze. Her voice rang out, not loud, but clear enough that every word sliced through the air. "I accept your challenge, sir." The hall went dead still. Then whispers erupted everywhere. Some widened their eyes in disbelief. Others stifled laughter, already convinced they were about to witness a public humiliation. Naomi stepped toward the center of the dance floor. She set the serving tray on a nearby table, removed her white apron, and folded it neatly as if she were laying down years of invisibility and smallness. She bent down and slipped off her heavy black shoes. When her bare feet touched the soft silk carpet, a strange current surged through her body. It had been so long since she last felt the stage beneath her. Bradley strode forward, pride radiating from his posture. He tilted his head, smirking. "Are you sure? Don't say I didn't warn you," Naomi answered, her voice calm, her eyes blazing with fire. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Isabella's brows furrowed, her cold smile faltering. Derek and Chase, who had been cheering a moment ago, fell into uneasy silence. Under the golden glow of the chandeliers, Naomi stood tall, exuding a presence no one had expected. The music began, a fierce, pulsing tango. Bradley seized Naomi's hand, pulling her into position as if he already owned the victory. At first, Naomi let him lead, even stumbling on purpose, feeding his smugness. He leaned close, whispering in her ear with a triumphant sneer, "Careful, Naomi, don't forget you could lose your job over one wrong step." Scattered laughter echoed around them. Isabella's smile grew satisfied, but Naomi, beneath the weight of their stares, felt something stirring within her. The rhythm, the steps, the pounding of her heart merged into one. From deep inside, she heard her father's voice echoing Naomi. "You were born to shine. Don't let anyone steal that dream." Naomi's eyes blazed. She caught the rhythm, and her movements shifted. Her steps became fluid, sharp, deliberate, nothing like what Bradley had anticipated. The crowd held its breath. The mockery was dissolving into shock. Bradley still hadn't realized it, but the control was slipping from his grasp, falling into the hands of the very girl he had underestimated. The music swelled, the tango notes burning through the air like fire. At first, Bradley Whitmore spun Naomi Carter around with the arrogance of a man convinced he held complete control. He stepped forcefully, deliberately throwing in complex moves meant to make her stumble. But Naomi was no longer the exhausted waitress of a moment ago. Each feigned wobble quickly gave way to decisive steps. Her body glided across the silk-carpeted floor, moving gracefully as though she were guided by the rhythm itself, not by his rough grip. Before Bradley could realize what was happening, Naomi spun, shifted, and seized the tempo. A sharp turn, a commanding sweep, and in an instant, the balance of power shifted. The crowd collectively held its breath. Only minutes earlier, they had been waiting for her humiliation. Now they were witnessing something entirely different, a barefoot waitress forcing the Whitmore heir off balance. Isabella Collins, who had been smirking with haughty pride, suddenly froze, her lips pressed shut, her icy gaze faltering into unease. Derek Sullivan and Chase Turner, who had been laughing along, exchanged uneasy glances in silence. Bradley began to sweat. He tried desperately to regain the lead, but each step grew clumsier against Naomi's precision. Every spin, every sharp accent of the music that she owned landed like a slap across his pride. Naomi could hear her own heartbeat, pulsing in rhythm with the music. The tempo surged back into her blood, each move aligning perfectly with the memories of her years of training at the Donovan Academy. Her eyes gleamed with pride. In that moment, she was no longer an invisible server. She was the performer she had always meant to be. Bradley misstepped, nearly falling. A ripple of whispers swept through the hall. Faces that had been waiting for a joke now lit up in awe. A few hesitant claps broke the silence, quickly swelling into excitement. Naomi spun, her plain waitress dress flaring as if it were made for the stage, radiating a presence no less than that of a professional dancer. As the music built toward its fiery climax, she seized Bradley in a powerful turn. He stumbled, dragged along, reduced it to nothing more than a puppet in her command. In her eyes burned a fire that had never gone out. She remembered her father's words, "Naomi, you were born to shine. Never let anyone steal that dream from you." And now, before hundreds of witnesses, she was doing exactly that. The room erupted as Naomi burst into a series of sharp, masterful moves, ending with a commanding final spin that forced Bradley into the closing pose of the tango. She stood tall, her back straight, her breath quick, but her gaze defiant. The hall fell silent for one long beat, as if everyone needed time to grasp what had just happened. Then, suddenly, applause exploded loudly, unrelenting. The ovation thundered through the ballroom, rattling the crystal overhead. Naomi stood her ground, bare feet planted on the carpet, her face radiant beneath the bright lights. Bradley, by contrast, was left gasping for breath, his hair disheveled, his face flushed with shame. The man who once believed himself the center of attention now looked nothing more than a clumsy shadow beside the brilliance Naomi had unleashed. Isabella's hand clenched around her wine glass, her face drained of color. Derek and Chase lowered their heads, unable to meet anyone's eyes. As for Naomi, she needed no words. Her glance, her dance, her fire had already said it all. Pride cannot be trampled, not even by a name as powerful as Whitmore. The thunderous applause echoed through the luxurious hall like never before. Hundreds of guests, the same people who just minutes earlier had been holding back their laughter, waiting for Naomi Carter to stumble. Now all rose to their feet, their clapping rolling like thunder. They weren't just applauding a performance, but a moment of reversal, a surge of unyielding pride that had just erupted before their eyes. Naomi stood there, her breathing heavy but her back straight, her chin lifted high. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders, the crystal chandeliers casting light that made her face shine brilliantly. She was no longer the invisible shadow serving drinks. She was an artist, forcing the entire room to bow in recognition. In stark contrast, Bradley Whitmore stood beside her in disgrace. His suit was disheveled, the carefully groomed hair now a tangled mess, his forehead drenched in sweat. Those once arrogant blue eyes were now clouded with confusion and humiliation. He, the man who could humiliate others with just a few words, had been exposed as weak before hundreds of eyes. Isabella Collins was frozen, her hand trembling so much the glass of wine nearly slipped. The cold smile that usually rested on her lips had completely vanished, replaced by an awkward stiffness. Derek Sullivan and Chase Turner, who had once joined in Bradley's ridicule, now lowered their heads, pretending to study the floor to avoid the shame spreading around them. Amid the cheering, another sound suddenly cracked through a sharp thud. Everyone turned. Bradley had thrown a stack of cash straight at Naomi's feet. Bills scattered across the silk carpet, fluttering like fallen leaves, as if she were nothing more than something to be bought. "This is your money," Bradley growled, his face burning with anger and shame. "Take it and get out of here." The packed room sank into silence. The applause stopped, replaced by stares filled with shock and growing disgust. A few guests shook their heads, eyes that once admired the Whitmore family now flashing with contempt. Naomi looked down at the scattered bills at her feet. $10,000 is enough to pay off the hospital debt, enough to finally breathe after years of exhaustion. Her throat tightened for a moment, but then clarity surged through her with burning force. If she bent down and picked up that money, it would mean accepting that everything was just a cheap transaction of dignity. It would reduce her dance to nothing more than paid entertainment. Naomi lifted her head. Her eyes burned like twin flames. Her voice rang out not loud, but resonant enough to carry through the silence of the entire hall. "I don't need your money. Bradley Whitmore. That dance was not for amusement, nor for money. I danced so you and everyone here would understand I am not an object to be mocked. No matter how poor I am, My dignity is beyond price." Her words landed like heavy stones. All eyes turned toward Bradley, who stood frozen, his fists clenched tight. A few seconds later, the applause returned, this time louder, fiercer. Cheers and whistles erupted, shaking the hall. Naomi turned, walking away from the dance floor, leaving the scattered bills lying cold on the carpet, like the shattered pride of the man who had just failed. Bradley stood staring after her, eyes blazing with rage and humiliation. In that moment, he realized that what he had wanted, public humiliation, had backfired completely. Naomi had not only preserved her honor, but won the respect of the entire room, while he himself had become the laughingstock. The grand doors of the Astoria Palace ballroom closed behind Naomi Carter, yet the sound of applause still echoed in her mind. Each step she took along the rain-slicked sidewalk under Chicago's streetlights felt like escaping an invisible cage. For the first time in years, Naomi truly felt something she had never dared to imagine. She had reclaimed her dignity. But just as the yellow glow of the street lamps reflected off the puddles, a camera flash lit up. Behind the lens was Ethan Ward, a young photographer hired to capture the gala. He had witnessed everything from the moment Bradley threw the money on the floor to the instant Naomi walked away with her head held high. Ethan froze when he reviewed the shot he had just taken. The heir of a massive corporation stood furious, while the barefoot waitress turned her back with pride, leaving the scattered bills abandoned at her feet, a picture sharp as a blade, capturing the entire truth in a single frame. Without hesitation, Ethan uploaded the series of photos to social media with a short caption. Naomi Carter, a barefoot waitress, refused $10,000 to protect her dignity. Meanwhile, Bradley Whitmore, heir to a real estate empire, threw money at her face after losing on the dance floor. Within hours, the post spread like wildfire. Tens of thousands of shares, countless comments poured in. Hashtags like Justice for Naomi and Whitmore Disgrace skyrocketed to the top. People raged at Bradley's arrogance while admiring Naomi's resilience. On forums and news sites, headlines began to flood in Waitress takes down Whitmore heir with a tango, Naomi Carter. From invisible to icon of self-respect, celebrities shared the story, praising Naomi for teaching the wealthy a lesson. Some artists even called it a rare, real-life theater moment. In his luxury apartment, Bradley Whitmore sat frozen, his phone exploding with notifications and messages. His face went pale as he read the biting comments. If you can't dance, fine. But why humiliate someone else? A billionaire's son just got schooled on dignity by a waitress. The Whitmore family should be ashamed of having an heir like this. Bradley slammed his phone onto the table, but his rage couldn't drown out the crushing feeling of being turned on by the entire world. At the Whitmore Corporation headquarters, Charles Whitmore and his father sat in an emergency board meeting. On the large screen, the leaked video replayed Bradley sneering, tossing money on the floor, and Naomi walking away to thunderous applause. Charles's face darkened. Everyone in the room knew this was no longer a private scandal. It was a public crisis. The company's stock price had already begun to plunge that very morning. A worried PR executive spoke up. "We need to respond immediately. The press won't stop calling. If we don't act, the company's image will collapse." Charles gripped the armrest of his chair, his voice a growl. All of this because of his recklessness. Bradley has dragged the Whitmore name into the mud before the entire world. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Naomi sat quietly by the window, Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages of congratulations and encouragement from strangers. Some even asked if she needed help or if there was a community fund to support her family. Naomi felt both overwhelmed and moved, yet deep down, she knew the truth this battle had only just begun. Behind the sudden wave of glory was an empire ready to crush anyone who dared to tarnish its reputation. And now, the eyes of the Whitmore family were fixed firmly on her. The next morning, the city of Chicago felt like it was on fire. News about the incident at the Astoria Palace Ballroom flooded every newspaper. On television, the image of Naomi Carter barefoot under the crystal lights was replayed again and again, intercut with footage of Bradley Whitmore throwing money in a fit of rage. Some commentators called it the symbol of arrogance brought to its knees. Others compared Naomi to a phoenix rising from the ashes. No matter the metaphor, everyone agreed the young woman had awakened in the public a fierce belief in the value of self-respect. Inside her small apartment, Naomi sat in front of the TV, her hands clenched tightly. She saw herself on the morning news, but what she felt wasn't simple pride. It was strange and heavy, as if a massive door had opened before her and she wasn't yet prepared to walk through it. The phone rang. On the other end was Henry Lawson, a renowned stage director who had created some of Broadway's most successful musicals. His voice was deep and steady, yet decisive. Naomi, I watched the video. You have something many professional dancers don't have, a raw truth that holds an entire room silent. I want to meet you. Naomi froze. Her heart pounded as if it had been pulled back to the days when she still held dreams of the Donovan Academy. She stammered, "But I quit dancing long ago." "I'm not," Henry cut in, his tone firm. "No, talent can be buried, but it doesn't disappear. I believe you still have the hunger, and if you're ready, I'll give you the opportunity you deserve." Naomi clutched the phone, tears blurring her vision. For the first time in years, someone saw her not as a waitress, but as an artist. Meanwhile, at Whitmore headquarters, the storm only worsened. Stocks continued to plummet, and investors pulled out in droves. The board began discussing forcing Charles Whitmore to step down in order to salvage confidence. Charles sat silently in the boardroom, fingers interlaced, his gaze dark. He knew very well the root of this disaster was no one but his own son. Bradley, on the other hand, was drowning in despair. His friends cut him off, and his fiancée, Isabella Collins, officially broke off the engagement with a cold text message. His luxury apartment suddenly felt like a gilded cage imprisoning a fallen man. Every headline, every bitter comment carved deeper into his fragile pride. In stark contrast to his collapse, Naomi felt a new strength rising within her, though she still worried about her father's illness. The applause from that night and Henry Lawson's offer had rekindled a fire she thought had long died out. Sitting alone by the window, Naomi whispered softly, "Dad, I won't let another chance slip away. I'll keep going, not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been belittled, trampled, the way I was." Outside, the Chicago morning shone bright, but deep inside, Naomi knew the road ahead would be filled with trials. The Whitmore family would not simply let this go, and the world beyond, as ruthless as the dance floor last night, was waiting to see if a poor girl could truly hold on to her dream. But this time, Naomi was ready. If Naomi's story touched you, make sure to subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters, where truth and justice will erupt even more powerfully.